The Urantia book, section 3, the history of Urantia, paper 70. The evolution of human government. No sooner had man partially solved the problem of making a living than he was confronted with the task of regulating human contacts. The development of industry demanded law, order and social adjustment. Private property necessitated government. On an evolutionary world, antagonisms are natural. Peace is secured only by some sort of social regulative system. Social regulation is inseparable from social organization. Association implies some controlling authority. Government compels the coordination of the antagonisms of the tribes, clans, families and individuals. Government is an unconscious development. It evolves by trial and error. It does have survival value, therefore it becomes traditional. Anarchy, augmented misery, therefore government. Comparative, law and order slowly emerged or is emerging. The coercive demands of the struggle for existence literally drove the human race along the progressive road to civilization. 1. The genesis of a war. War is the natural state and heritage of evolving man. Peace is the social yardstick measuring civilization's advancement before the partial socialization of the advancing races. Man was exceedingly individualistic, extremely suspicious, and unbelievably quarrelsome. Violence is the law of nature, hostility the automatic reaction of the children of nature, while war is but these same activities carried on collectively, and wherever and whenever the fabric of civilization becomes stressed by the complications of society's advancement, there is always an immediate and ruinous reversion to these early methods of violent adjustment of the irritations of human inter-associations. War is an animalistic reaction to misunderstandings and irritations. Peace attends upon the civilized solution of all such problems and difficulties. Well, peace is something that the human races have not yet reached. They are not even close to it. The Sanghic races, together with the later deteriorated Adamites and Nodites, were all belligerent. The Andonites were early taught the Golden Rule, and even today their Eskimo descendants live very much by that code. Custom is strong among them, and they are very free from violent antagonisms. Andon taught his children to settle disputes by each beating a tree with a stick. Meanwhile, cursing the tree, the one whose stick broke first was the victor. The later Andonites used the settle disputes by holding a public show at which the disputants made fun of and ridiculed each other, while the audience decided the winner by its applause. But there could be no such phenomenon as war until society had evolved sufficiently far to actually experience periods of peace and to sanction warlike practices. We are now at the brink of extinction of all this primitiveness. And society as it is nowadays the new generations of humans do not tolerate any longer these primitive ways. So we are now seeing a decline of primitivism finally and thankfully in the entire social structure of human races. All the warmongering that is going on nowadays will be a great test in how many percentage of the people are still buying into this warmongering and are still believing the liars. And we will see how the human races on this planet finally are able to break with all these primitivenesses and make the first steps towards spiritual brotherhood. So sufficiently, but there could be no such phenomenon as war until society had evolved sufficiently far to actually experience periods of peace and to sanction warlike practices. The very concept of war implies some degree of organization. And warfare persists because man is human. Well, better said, humans still are in this animalistic state of beingness. And as long as they are in this and slowly progress themselves out of it, war will still be part of humans' history. But the time is coming near that new generations of humans are not tolerating all this primitiveness anymore, and who truly want to set the first steps into becoming a more mature spiritual human being. Warfare persists because man is human, evolved from an animal, and all animals are bellicose. Among the early causes of war were 1. Hunger, 2. Women scarcity or woman scarcity, and so woman stealing has always caused a war. 3. Vanity, the desire to exhibit tribal prowess. So vanity, the desire to exhibit tribal prowess. 4. Slaves, need of recruits for the labor ranks. 5. Revenge was the motive for war when one tribe believed that a neighboring tribe had caused the death of a fellow tribesman. 6. Recreation. War was looked upon as recreation by the young men of these early times. If no good and sufficient pretext for war arose, when peace became oppressive, neighboring tribes were accustomed to go out in semi-friendly combat, to engage in a foray as a holiday, to enjoy a sham battle. 7. Religion, the desire to make converts to the cult. The primitive religions all sanctioned war. Only in recent times has religion begun to frown upon war. The early priesthoods were unfortunately usually allied with the military power, and it's still, until the day of today, they are still, the modern priests of today are still part of the military machine. One of the great peace moves of the ages has been the attempt to separate church and state. It was an attempt. Later on they did not do, because church and state are intertwined with each other. Always these olden tribes made war at the bidding of their so-called gods, at the behest of their chiefs or medicine men. The Hebrews believed in such a so-called god of battles, and the narrative of their raid on the Midianites is a typical recital of atrocious cruelty of the ancient tribal wars. This assault, with its slaughter of all the males and the later killing of all male children and all women who were no virgins, would have done honor to the Moors of a tribal chieftain of 200,000 years ago. And still people are believing this story tale, and do not want to see that it is all history. And we may let go of this history right now and let us grow out of this primitiveness and make the first steps in becoming a mature spiritual human being that is able to create a spiritual brotherhood based on the fatherhood of God. And the Hebrews did all this warmongering and war and killing of males and females and children, all under the disguise and in the name of the Lord God of Israel. So here comes the whole idea that war is being done because God wants. Well, this is completely nonsense, of course, because God does not want to have his children in war. God wants his children to see that they love one another and not going into battle anymore, nor killing one another for, ridiculous things. So this idea of what later came with the banners with the cross on it and whatever, and under the name of God we bring we do this war to bring peace and whatever. This is a narrative of the evolution of society, the natural outworking of the problems of the races, man working out his own destiny on earth. Such atrocities are not instigated by deity, notwithstanding the tendency of man to place the responsibility on his so-called gods. So military mercy has been slow in coming to mankind, even when a woman, Deborah, ruled the Hebrews. The same wholesale cruelty persisted. Her general, in his victory over the Gentiles, caused all the host to fall upon the sword. There was not one left. Very early in the history of the race, poisoned weapons were used. All sorts of mutilations were practiced, which is still being practiced, by the way. Saul did not hesitate to require 100 Philistine foreskins as the dowry David should pay for his daughter Michal. Or Michal. Early wars were fought between tribes as a whole, but in later times, when two individuals in different tribes had a dispute, instead of both tribes fighting, the two disputants engaged in a duel. It also became a custom for two armies to stake all on the outcome of a contest between a representative chosen from each side, as in the instance of David and Goliath. Well, the last piece, the first refreshment of war, was the taking of prisoners. Next, women were exempted from hostilities, and then came the recognition of non-combatants. Military castes and standing armies soon developed to keep peace and to keep pace with the increasing complexity of combat. So military castes and standing armies soon developed to keep pace with the increasing complexity of combat. Thus did warfare gradually evolve from the primitive man hunt to the somewhat more orderly system of the later day so-called civilized nations, but only slowly does the social attitude of amity displace that of enmity. And then too, the social value of a war. War has had a social value to past civilizations because it 1. Imposed discipline and forced cooperation, and 2. Put a premium on fortitude and courage, 3. Fostered and solidified nationalism, interesting, 4. Destroyed weak and unfit peoples, 5. Dissolved the illusion of primitive equality and selectively stratified society. War has had a certain evolutionary and selective value, but like slavery, it must sometime be abandoned as civilization slowly advances. Olden wars promoted travel and cultural intercourse. These ends are now better served by modern methods of transport and communication. Olden wars strengthened nations, but modern struggles disrupt civilized culture. Ancient warfare resulted in the decimation of inferior peoples. The net result of modern conflict is the selective destruction of the best human stocks. Early wars promoted organization and efficiency, but these have now become the aims of modern industry. The nations of Urantia have already entered upon the gigantic struggle between nationalistic militarism and industrialism. And in many ways, this conflict is analogous to the age-long struggle between the herder-hunter and the farmer. But if industrialism is to triumph over militarism, it must avoid the dangers which beset it. The perils of budding industry on Urantia are 1. The strong drift toward materialism, spiritual blindness, 2. The worship of wealth-power, value distortion, 3. The vices of luxury, cultural immaturity, 4. The increasing dangers of indolence, surface insensitivity, 5. The growth of undesirable racial softness, biologic deterioration, and 6. The threat of standardized industrial slavery, personality stagnation. Labor is ennobling, but drudgery in benumbing. Militarism is autocratic and cruel-savage. It promotes social organization among the conquerors, but disintegrates the vanquished. Industrialism is more civilized and should be so carried on as to promote initiative and to encourage individualism. Society should in every way possible foster originality. Man will never accept peace as a normal mode of living until he has been thoroughly and repeatedly convinced that peace is best for his material welfare, and until society has wisely provided peaceful substitutes for the gratification of that inherent tendency periodically to let loose a collective drive designed to liberate those ever-accumulating emotions and energies belonging to the self-preservation reactions of the human species. 3 early human associations. In the most primitive society, the horde is everything, even children are its common property. The evolving family displaced the horde in child rearing, while the emerging clans and tribes took its place as the social unit. Sex hunger and mother love establish the family, but real government does not appear until superfamily groups have begun to form. In the pre-family days of the horde, leadership was provided by informally chosen individuals. The African Bushmen have never progressed beyond this primitive stage. They do not have chiefs in the horde. In the early ages, each tribe was surrounded by concentric circles of increasing fear and suspicion. Hence it was once the custom to kill all strangers, later on to enslave them. The old idea of friendship meant adoption into the clan, and clan membership was believed to survive death, one of the earliest concepts of eternal life. The ceremony of adoption consisted in drinking each other's blood. In some groups, saliva was exchanged in the place of blood drinking, this being the ancient origin of the practice of social kissing. And all ceremonies of association, whether marriage or adoption, were always terminated by feasting. And in later times, blood diluted with red wine was used, and eventually wine alone was drunk to seal the adoption ceremony, which was signified in the touching of the wine cups and consummated by the swallowing of the beverage. The Hebrews employed a modified form of this adoption ceremony. So their Arab ancestors made use of the oath taken while the hand of the candidate rested upon the generative organ of the tribal native. The Hebrews treated adopted aliens kindly and fraternally, and now we can understand where this whole idea of laying your hand on the so-called Bible is coming from. Actually, this is a leftover of this primitive early, you can say, ceremonial ritual. The Hebrews treated adopted aliens kindly and fraternally. The stranger that dwells within you shall be as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself. Guest friendship was a relation of temporary hospitality. When visiting guests departed, a dish would be broken in half, one piece being given the departing friend so that it would serve as a suitable introduction for a third party who might arrive on a later visit. It was customary for guests to pay their way by telling tales of their travels and adventures. The storytellers of olden times became so popular that the Moors eventually forbade their functioning during either the hunting or harvest seasons. 4. Clans and tribes. The first peace group was the family, then the clan, the tribe, and later on the nation, which eventually became the modern territorial state. The fact that present-day peace groups have long since expanded beyond blood ties to embrace nations is most encouraging, despite the fact that Urantian nations are still spending vast sums on war preparations. The clans were blood tie groups within the tribe, and they owed their existence to certain common interests, such as 1. Tracing origin back to a common ancestor, 2. Allegiance to a common religious totem, 3. Speaking the same dialect, 4. Sharing a common dwelling place, 5. Fearing the same enemies, and 6. Having had a common military experience. The clan headmen were always subordinate to the tribal chief, the early tribal governments being at loose confederation of clans. The native Australians never developed a tribal form of government. The clan peace chiefs usually ruled through the mother line. Why? Because women are very into peacemaking. Women have this in their genome, so to say, to do everything to create peace, to create situations in which they can create peace. The tribal war chiefs established the father line. The courts of the tribal chiefs and early kings consisted of the head men of the clans, whom it was customary to invite into. So again, to whom it was customary to invite into the king's presence several times a year. And this enabled him to watch them and the better secure their cooperation. The clan served a valuable purpose in local self-government, but they greatly delayed the growth of large and strong nations. And then 5, the beginning of government. Every human institution had a beginning, and civil government is a product of progressive evolution, just as much as are marriage, industry, and religion. From the earlier clans and primitive tribes, there gradually developed the successive orders of human government, which have come and gone right on down to those forms of social and civil regulation that characterized the second third of the 20th century. The first real governmental body was the Council of the Elders. This regulative group was composed of old men who had distinguished themselves in some efficient manner. Wisdom and experience were early appreciated even by barbaric men, and there ensured a long age of domination of the elders. This reign of the oligarchy of age gradually grew into the patriarchal idea, and we still have this oligarch families, 385 to be more precise. These 385 families are oligarchies. Some tribes had female councils, and from time to time many tribes had women rulers. Certain tribes of the red men preserved the teaching of Monalonton in following the unanimous rule of the Council of Seven. It has been hard for mankind to learn that neither peace nor war can be run by a debating society. The primitive palavers were seldom useful. The race early learned that an army commanded by a group of clan heads had no chance against a strong one-man army. War has always been a so-called kingmaker. In later times, some chiefs were chosen for other than military service, being selected because of unusual physique or outstanding personal abilities. The red men often had two sets of chiefs, the sachems or peace chiefs and the hereditary war chiefs. The peace rulers were also judges and teachers. Some early communities were ruled by medicine men who often acted as chiefs. One man would act as priest, physician and chief executive. Quite often the early royal insignias had originally been the symbols or emblems of priestly dress. And it was by these steps that the executive branch of government gradually came into existence. The clan and tribal councils continued in an advisory capacity and as forerunners of the later appearing legislative and judicial branches. In Africa today, all these forms of primitive government are in actual existence among the various tribes. And then 6, monarchical government. Effective state rule only came with the arrival of a chief with full executive authority. Men found that effective government could be had only by conferring power on a personality, not by endowing an idea. Rulership grew out of the idea of family authority or wealth. When a patriarchal kinglet became a real king, he was sometimes called a father of his people. And of course it is stated in quotation marks. Later on, kings were thought to have sprung from so-called heroes. And still further on, rulership became hereditary due to the belief in divine origin of kings. Hereditary kingship avoided the anarchy which had previously wrought such havoc between the death of a king and the election of a successor. The family had a biologic head, the clan a selected natural leader, the tribe and the later state had no natural leader. And this was an additional reason for the making of chief kings hereditary. The idea of so-called royal families and aristocracy or aristocracy was also based on the mores of, between quotation marks, name ownership in the clans. The succession of kings was eventually regarded as supernatural, the so-called royal blood being thought to extend back to the times of the materialized staff of Prince Caligasta. And I say deliberately so-called royal blood because those people do not have this. Thus kings became fetish personalities and were inordinately feared. So this is interesting that the kings are still in this title of fetishism. There are fetishism. There are tools and symbols. That's what they are. And that's the only thing that their role is, and that's what they represent. Nothing more. The first cabinet officer was a food administrator. Others shortly followed. Rulers soon appointed representatives to be in charge of commerce and religion. Rulers soon appointed representatives to be in charge of commerce and religion. And the development of a cabinet was a direct step toward depersonalization of executive authority. These assistants of the early kings became the accepted nobility, and the king's wife gradually rose to the dignity of so-called queen as women came to be held in higher esteem. The medicine men, witch doctors and priests have always been a powerful check on the kings, and they still have this unto the day of today. All prime ministers, presidents, kings, queens, and whatever, they are still using witches and priests. They have them still in service. Subsequently, the landowners, the aristocracy, exerted a restraining influence, and ever and anon the clans and tribes would simply rise up and overthrow their despots and tyrants. Well, this is exactly what we have to do today. Overthrow the despots and tyrants. Deposed rulers, when sentenced to death, were often given the option of committing suicide, which gave origin to the ancient social vogue of suicide in certain circumstances. And then point 7, primitive clubs and secret societies. Blood kinship determined the first social groups. Association enlarged the kinship clan. Intermarriage was the next step in group enlargement, and the resultant complex tribe was the first true political body. The next advance in social development was the evolution of religious cults and the political clubs. These first appeared as secret societies and originally were wholly religious. Subsequently, they became regulative. At first they were men's clubs, later they became also women's groups. So, and mixed. I know that there are secret societies who have both men and women. And so later on women's groups appeared. Presently they became divided into two classes, socio-political and religio-mystical. There were many reasons for the secrecy of these societies, such as 1. Fear of incurring the displeasures of the rulers because of the violation of some taboo. 2. In order to practice minority religious rights. 3. For the purpose of preserving valuable, between quotation marks, spirit or trade secrets. And 4. For the enjoyment of some special charm or magic. The very secrecy of these societies conferred on all members the power of mystery over the rest of the tribe. Secrecy also appeals to vanity. The initiations were the social aristocracy of their day. After initiation, the boys hunted with the men, whereas before they had gathered vegetables with the women. And was the supreme humiliation, a tribal disgrace, to fail to pass the puberty tests and thus be compelled to remain outside the man's abode with the women and children to be considered effeminate. Besides nominations, or none, better said, besides non-initiates were not allowed to marry. So non-initiates were not allowed to marry. Commercialized prostitution began when these men's clubs paid money for the use of women from other tribes. The puberty initiation ceremony usually extended over a period of 7 years. Much self-torture and painful cutting entered into these ceremonies. And I think that is still going on. Circumcision was first practiced as a rite of initiation into one of these secret fraternities. The tribal marks were cut on the body as a part of the puberty initiation. The taboo, or better said, the tattoo, originated as such as a badge of membership. This is interesting. The tattoos are actually also a sign and emblem of telling others that you belong to a certain tribe, to a certain clan, to a certain group. And later on it changed. It got a second understanding, so to say, and tattoos also were being seen as a badge of membership to what group or clan or tribe. You should ask yourself, are you belonging if you do tattoos? And it is really absurd that I have seen the last 10-15 years a uprising of tattooed people, and it is now on all levels of society, from the more educated to the lesser educated. Everyone these days have a tattoo. So we need to ask, why is it that you are being urged? Who is telling you to do this? Who is whispering in your ears that you have to do a tattoo? Because it's part of primitiveness. So if you do this, you are actually bringing yourselves backward in time. You are bonding yourselves into primitivism, and you make yourselves actually a slave of primitivism. And yeah, you think that you belong to a tribe or clan or whatever, but in actuality, do we? Because the plan of God is a spiritual brotherhood of men, and a spiritual brotherhood does not have any forms of clans or tribes or groups anymore, because then we become one unit. Such torture, together with much privation, was designed to harden these youths, to impress them with the reality of life and its inevitable hardships. This purpose is better accomplished by the later appearing athletic games and physical contests. Now we know where this idea of sports games and events are coming from. Not only from the ancient Greeks, but from far earlier back in time. Many later tribes sanctioned the formation of women's secret clubs, the purpose of which was to prepare adolescent girls for wifehood and motherhood. After initiation, girls were eligible for marriage and were permitted to attend the between quotation marks bride show. And this is also a practice that is still going on. So humanity, the human races are not, you can say the human races have not completely stepped out of all these primitivisms. The coming out party of those days, women's orders pledged against marriage, early came into existence. And while men's and women's clubs were often given to persecuting each other, some advanced tribes, after contact with the Dalmatia teachers, experimented with co-education, having boarding schools for both sexes. Secret societies contributed to the building up of social castes, chiefly by the mysterious character of their initiations. The members of these societies first wore masks to frighten the curious away from their mourning rites, ancestor worship. Later this ritual developed into a pseudo-seance at which ghosts were reputed to have appeared. The ancient societies of the new birth, between quotation marks, used signs and employed a special secret language. They also forswore certain foods and drinks. They acted as night police and otherwise functioned in a wide range of social activities. All right. These societies gave rise to the first political parties. The first party government was the strong versus the weak. In ancient times, a change of administration only followed civil war, abundant proof that the weak had become strong. Taxation has been a long struggle, one of the earliest forms being the tithe, 1/10 of the hunt or spoils. Taxes were originally levied, you can say, to keep up the king's house, but it was found that they were easier to collect when disguised as an offering for the support of the temple service. By these secret associations grew into the first charitable organizations and later evolved into the earlier religious societies. The forerunners of churches. Finally, some of these societies became intertribal, the first international fraternities. And then 8 social classes. The mental and physical inequality, of human beings ensures that social classes will appear. The only worlds without social strata are the most primitive and the most advanced. A dawning civilization has not yet begun the differentiation of social levels, while a world settlement in light and life has largely effaced these divisions of mankind, which are so characteristic of all intermediate evolutionary stages. As society emerged from savagery to barbarism, its human components tended to become grouped in classes for the following general reasons. 1. Natural contact, kinship, marriage. The first social distinctions were based on sex, age, and blood. Kinship to the chief. 2. Personal, the recognition of ability, endurance, skill, and fortitude, soon followed by the recognition of language, mastery, knowledge, and general intelligence. 3. Chance, war, and emigration resulted in the separating of human groups. Class evolution was powerfully influenced by conquest. The relation of groups. 4. Economic, rich and poor, wealth and the possession of slaves was a genetic basis for one class of society. 5. Geographic classes arose consequent upon urban or rural settlements. City and country have respectively contributed to the differentiation of the herder age, agriculturist, and the trader industrialist with their divergent viewpoints and reactions. And then 6. Social classes have gradually formed according to popular estimate of the social worth of different groups. 7. Vocational, as vocations multiplied, they tended to establish castes and guilds. 8. Religious, the early cult clubs produced their own classes within the clans and tribes, and the piety and mysticism of the priests have long perpetuated them as a separate social group. 9. Racial, the presence of 2 or more races within a given nation or territorial unit usually produces color castes. 10. Age, youth and maturity. Among the tribes, the boy remained under the watch care of his father as long as the father lived, while the girl was left in the care of her mother until married. Alright. Classes in society having naturally formed will persist until man gradually achieves their evolutionary obliteration through intelligent manipulation of the biologic, intellectual, and spiritual resources of a progressing civilization, such as 1. Biologic renovation of the racial stocks, the selective elimination of inferior human strains. This will tend to eradicate many mortal inequalities. 2. Educational training of the increased brain power which will arise out of such biologic improvement. And 3. Religious quickening of the feelings of mortal kinship and brotherhood. And then 3. Religious quickening of the feelings of mortal kinship and brotherhood. But these measures can bear their true fruits only in the distant millenniums of the future, although much social improvement will immediately result from the intelligent, wise, and patient manipulation of these acceleration factors of cultural progress. Religion is the mighty lever that lifts civilization from chaos, but it is powerless apart from the fulcrum of sound and normal mind resting securely on sound and normal heredity. 9. Human rights. I need to know how much it is. It's a very long paper. Nature confers no rights on man, only life and a world in which to live it. Nature does not even confer the right to live, as might be deduced by considering what would likely happen if an unarmed man met a hungry tiger face to face in the primitive forests. Society's prime gift to man is security. All right. Gradually, society asserted its rights, and at the present time they are 1. Assurance of food supply, 2. Military defense, security through preparedness, and then 3. Internal peace, preservation, prevention of personal violence and social disorder. 4. Sex control, marriage, the family institution. 5. Property, the right to own. 6. Fostering of individual and group competition. 7. Provision for educating and training youth. 8. Promotion of trade and commerce, industrial development. 9. Improvement of labor conditions and rewards. And 10. The guarantee of the freedom of religious practices, to the end that all of these other social activities may be exalted by becoming spiritually motivated. When rights are old, beyond knowledge of origin, they are often called natural rights. But human rights are not really natural, they are entirely social. They are relative and ever-changing, being no more than the rules of the game. Recognized adjustments of relations governing the ever-changing phenomena of human competition. Few human rights were recognized in the European Middle Ages, then every man belonged to someone else, and rights were only privileges or favors granted by state or church. And the revolt from this error was equally erroneous in that it led to the belief that all men are born equal, which is not true. We are not equal, because if that was the case, how come that so many people are treated so poorly by their fellow brothers and sisters? The weak and the inferior have always contended for equal rights. They have always insisted that the state compel the strong and superior to supply their wants and otherwise make good those deficiencies, which all too often are the natural result of their own indifference and indolence. Society cannot offer equal rights to all, but it can promise to administer the varying rights of each with fairness and equity. It is the business and duty of society to provide the child of nature with a fair and peaceful opportunity to pursue self-maintenance, participate in self-perpetuation, while at the same time enjoying some measures of self-gratification, the sum of all three constituting human happiness. If they are all practiced in balance, now we see an over self-gratification, and if everything is based on self-gratification, what happens? Society starts to collapse. All right. 10. Evolution of justice. Natural justice is a man-made theory. It is not a reality. In nature, justice is purely theoretic, wholly a fiction. Nature provides but one kind of justice, inevitable conformity of results to causes. Justice, as conceived by man, means getting one's rights and has, therefore, been a matter of progressive evolution. The concept of justice may well be constitutive in a spirit endowment mind, but it does not spring full-fledgedly into existence on the worlds of space, which I actually get, because in the worlds of space we do not have all these things. It's not necessary there, because there we are real brothers and sisters toward one another. Primitive man assigned all phenomena to a person. In case of death, the savage asked not what killed him, but who. Accidental murder was not therefore recognized, and in the punishment of crime, the motive of the criminal was wholly disregarded. Judgment was rendered in accordance with the injury done. The Old Testament records one of those ordeals, a marital guilt test. If a man suspected his wife of being untrue to him, he took her to the priest and stated his suspicions, after which the priest would prepare a concoction consisting of holy water and sweepings from the temple floor. After due ceremony, including threatening curses, the accused wife was made to drink the nasty potion. If she was guilty, the water that causes the curse shall enter into her and become bitter, and her belly shall swell, and her thighs shall rot, and the woman shall be accursed among the people. If by any chance any woman could quaff this filthy draught and not shown symptoms of physical illness, she was acquitted of the charges made by her jealous husband. These atrocious methods of crime detection were practiced by almost all the evolving tribes at one time or another. Dueling is a modern survival of the trial by ordeal. Society early adopted the paying back attitude of retaliation, an eye for an eye, a life for a life. The evolving tribes all recognized this right of blood vengeance. Vengeance became the aim of primitive life, but religion has since greatly modified these early tribal practices. The teachers of revealed religion have always proclaimed, "Vengeance is mine, said the Lord." Vengeance, killing, in early times was not altogether unlike present-day murders under the pretense of the unwritten law. Suicide was a common mode of retaliation if one were unable to avenge himself in life. He died entertaining the belief that as a ghost he could return himself in life and visit wrath upon his enemy. And since this belief was very general, the threat of suicide on an enemy's doorstep was usually sufficient to bring him to terms. Primitive man did not hold life very dear. Well, to be very honest, if you look at this so-called society of today, we should really ask a question if we truly hold life very dear. Suicide over trifles was common, but the teachings of the Dalmatians greatly lessened this custom, while in more recent times leisure, comforts, religion and philosophy have united to make life sweeter. The Eskimos of today, however, still leave the penalty for a crime, even for murder, to be decreed and administered by the family wronged. Another advance was the imposition of fines for taboo violations, the provision of penalties. These fines constituted the first public revenue. The practice of paying blood money also came into vogue as a substitute for blood vengeance. Such damages were usually paid in women or cattle. It was a long time before actual fines, monetary compensation, were assessed as punishment for crime. While the Hebrews were the first to abolish the practice of paying blood money, Moses taught that they should take no satisfaction for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death. He shall surely be put to death. Punishment by burning alive was once a common practice. It was recognized by many ancient rulers, including Hammurabi and Moses, the latter directing that many crimes, particularly those of a grave sex nature, should be punished by burning at the stake. If the, between quotation marks, the daughter of a priest or other leading citizen turned to public prostitution, it was the Hebrew custom to burn her with fire. Treason, the so-called selling out or betrayal of one's tribal associates, was the first capital crime. Cattle stealing was universally punished by summary death, and even recently horse stealing was and has been similarly punished. But as time passed, it was learned that the severity of the punishment was not so valuable a deterrent to crime as was its certainty and swiftness. Lynching and dueling represent the unwillingness of the individual to surrender private redress to the state. And then point 11, law and courts. It is just as difficult to draw sharp distinctions between mores and laws as to indicate exactly when at the dawning night is succeeded by day. Mores are laws and police regulations in the making. When long established, the undefined mores tend to crystallize into precise laws, concrete regulations and well-defined social conventions. Law is always at first negative and prohibitive. In advancing civilizations, it becomes increasingly positive and directive. Early society operated negatively, granting the individual the right to live by imposing upon all others the command, "You shall not kill." Every grant of rights or liberty to the individual involves curtailment of the liberties of all others, and this is affected by the taboo primitive law. Law is a codified record of long human experience, public opinion, crystallized and legalized. The mores were the raw material of accumulated experience, out of which later ruling minds formulated the written laws. The ancient judge had no laws. When he handed down a decision, he simply said, "It is the custom." Reference to precedent in court decisions represents the effort of judges to adapt written laws to the changing conditions of society. This provides for progressive adaptation to altering social conditions of society. This provides for progressive adaptation to altering social conditions combined with the impressiveness of traditional continuity. Property disputes were handled in many ways, such as 1. By destroying the disputed property, 2. By force. The contestants fought it out. 3. By arbitration, a third party decided. And 4. By appeal to the elders, later to the courts. The first courts were regulated fistic encounters. The judges were merely umpires or referees. They saw to it that the fight was carried on according to approved rules. On entering a court combat, each party made a deposit with the judge to pay the costs and fine after one had been defeated by the other. Might was still right. Later on, verbal arguments were substituted for physical blows. The whole idea of primitive justice was not so much to be fair as to dispose of the contest and thus prevent public disorder and private violence. But primitive man did not so much resent what would now be regarded as an injustice. It was taken for granted that those who had power would use it selfishly. Nevertheless, the status of any civilization may be very accurately determined by the thoroughness and equity of its courts and by the integrity of its judges. And as last, point 12, allocation of civil authority. I think that is the last. Yeah. So the great struggle in the evolution of government has concerned the concentration of power. The universe administrators have learned from experience that the evolutionary peoples on the inhabited worlds are best regulated by the representative type of a civil government. When there is maintained proper balance of power between the well-coordinated executive, legislative and judicial branches, while primitive authority was based on strength, physical power, the ideal, government is the representative system wherein leadership is based on ability, but in the days of barbarism there was entirely too much war to permit representative government to function effectively. In the long struggle between the division of authority and unity of command, the dictator won. The early and diffuse powers of the primitive council of elders were gradually concentrated in the person of the absolute monarch. After the arrival of real kings, the groups of elders persisted as quasi-legislative judicial advisory bodies, later on legislatures of co-ordinate status made their appearance, and eventually supreme courts of adjudication were established, separate from the legislatures. The king was the executor of the mores, the original or unwritten law. Later, he enforced the legislative enactments, the crystallization of public opinion, a popular assembly as an expression of public opinion, though slow in appearing, marked a great social advance. Urantia mortals are entitled to liberty. They should create their systems of government. They should adopt their constitutions or other charters of civil authority and administrative procedures. And having done this, they should select their most competent and worthy fellows as chief executives. For representatives in the legislative branch, they should elect only those who are qualified intellectually and morally to fulfill such sacred responsibilities as judges of their high and supreme tribunals. Only those who are endowed with natural ability and who have been made wise by replete experience should be chosen. If men would maintain their freedom, they must, after having chosen their charter of liberty, provide for its wise, intelligent, and fearless interpretation to the end that there may be prevented. 1. Usurpation of unwarranted power by either the executive or legislative branches. 2. Machinations of ignorant and superstitious agitators. 3. Retardation of scientific progress. 4. Stalemate of the dominance of mediocrity. 5. Domination by vicious minorities. 6. Control by ambitious and clever would-be dictators. 7. Disastrous disruption of panics. 8. Exploitation by the unscrupulous. 9. Taxation enslavement of the citizenry by the state. 10. Failure of social and economic fairness. 11. Union of church and state. 12. Loss of personal liberty. These are the purposes and aims of constitutional tribunals acting as governors upon the engines of representative government. On an evolutionary world, mankind's struggle to perfect government or to a perfect government on Urantia has to do with perfecting channels of administration, with adapting them to ever-changing current needs, with improving powers distribution within government, and then with selecting such administrative leaders as are truly wise. While there is a divine and ideal form of government, such cannot be revealed, but must be slowly and laboriously discovered by the men and women of each planet throughout the universes of time and space. And with this said, I have come to the end of paper 70. This paper has been presented to us by a lovely beautiful Melchizedek of Nebadon, and I want to say thank you so much, Melchizedek of Nebadon, for giving us this in-depth information about the evolution of human government. Thank you. And I also want to give my thanksgiving to all of you who have listened to this audio video. I wish you all a beautiful and joyful day, and God bless you.